Hello, and welcome to the Homeschool Solutions Show. My name is Janice Campbell, and I'm one of the many hosts here on the podcast. Each week, we bring you an encouraging conversation from this busy and blessed journey of educating our children at home. While the title of the show is Homeschool Solutions, we don't pretend to have all the answers to all the homeschooling questions. It is our hope that this podcast will point you to Jesus Christ, that you may seek his counsel as you train your children in the way they should go. And now, on to today's show. Hi, I'm Janice Campbell, and today I'm here with Jennifer Dow to talk about reading in community. Perhaps you've been wanting to read literature in community too. So today, our guest is Jennifer Dow. She's a classical teacher, speaker, and writer who's had a lot of experience reading in community and out. As a CERC certified classical teacher, she's taught humanities, logic, rhetoric, and the fine arts since 2009. She's the founder of the Paideia Fellowship, and that's an organization that helps teachers and leaders at home and school teach the classical liberal arts. So she writes, she teaches, she speaks, and today she's here to help us understand what it means to read with others and how we can make it happen in our own lives. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
It's really fun to talk to you, as always. And as we're getting started, the first thing I want to ask you is, as you think of reading, what are one or two books that have made an impact on your thinking or your way of life? And that's books you've read at any age.
Yeah, I love this question. So the two books that came to mind first was Piercing the Darkness in This Present Darkness. So I was thinking childhood, which ones affected me the most. And these two books my mom gave me when I was a teenager, and I was really wrestling with whether I wanted to be Christian or not. You know, what do I want for my faith? And I've always been a person that wanted depth and mystery and all of those things. And honestly, at that time in my life, I wasn't really seeing that in Christianity. It just seemed like no depth. And, from my teenager perspective, and she gave me these two books. And for whatever reason, these two books by Frank Peretti talked about the world that we're in, but then this parallel spiritual world. And it fascinated me so much. And it really opened my eyes to maybe there was more mystery and depth than I had thought. And it just captured my imagination. And it really kind of, I guess, saved me, for lack of a better word. It drew me in to want to explore that more. So definitely had an impact on my thinking and captured my imagination. And I was really grateful for those two books. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And teenage years are so important to find those excellent books. And even if they're not like fine literature, they can be something that is the necessary thing for right then, and any others as an adult, perhaps.
Yeah. So one that came to mind as an adult was Tale of Two Cities. And there's kind of a funny story behind this one. So originally I was supposed to have read it as a teenager. And my youth pastor at the time was really interested in this book. And I don't know why I decided to lie and say that I had read it, but I lied to my youth pastor and said that I had read it and I hadn't. And then as an adult, years later, I felt bad. I'm like, oh, I need to come clean. So I email him and tell him, and he's like, it's okay, Jen, not to worry. But then I end up reading it actually as an adult, end up teaching it in one of my classes. And there was two big things that really transformed my thinking. One of them was, and if you've read it, there's this man who's put in prison for 19 years, and he comes out, and his daughter is charged with recalling him to life, as the phrase they continue to repeat over and over again throughout the work. And she's just not really sure what to do or how to do that. And so one of the family friends aids her, stays with her often, will even stay with the dad as he goes on this journey of healing. And it raises this question of what is possible in terms of our role in other people's lives in recalling people to life. Because in many ways, that's the work of Christ. That's the work of the Holy Spirit. But is there something we can do? If so, what? What are the limits and possibilities of this? And it really just explored this concept. One of my favorite scenes was when the daughter gets married, and she was hesitant to get married. She didn't want to leave her dad, but she decides to go. And so Mr. Laurie stays with the doctor, who is the father, while she's on her honeymoon. And he has kind of a relapse into his psychosis because he was not sane when he left the prison, and understandably so. And he sat there, and he intuitively knew that he couldn't say anything to the doctor to get him out of his delusions. And all he did, and the line goes something like this: he sat by the window, read and wrote, and gave a silent protest that this indeed was a free space. And so this idea of silent protest, that by the way I live, the way that I sit, the way that I read, the way that I write, that it is a silent protest that this indeed is a free place, and we don't have to be captive to our illusions. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was all, when I was in college, I studied apologetics, and I wanted, was going to explain the truth to everybody. And there was part of a huge transformation for me, that you can't explain everything. Some things just are caught. So
I love that. And, that's a really amazing quote. I have not looked at Tale of Two Cities since probably high school age. And I really do need to go back and read it, because that reminds me what a compelling book it is. And that's something that books can do. They can bring an idea to life, the idea of being that silent protest, free space, and all of that. And books like that are so powerful, do you think they're better read alone or in community, or is there arguments for doing both?
Yeah, I think there's definitely arguments for doing both, because we are communal beings, but at the same time, we have individual lives. In fact, I'm doing some research on friendship and reading this one book about, it's an anthology of the philosophers on friendship. And one of the introductory essays, he's talking about the tension between the altruistic and the egoistic. So our desires that relate to ourselves, and then the desires to move outwards towards our fellow man, and how they can seemingly be in conflict with each other, but they both have a legitimate place in our life. So I don't think it's a either or, I think it's a both and.
Nice. So what sort of settings have you had the opportunity to read in community? I mean, I think we mentioned that, and a lot of people immediately think book groups, but what else is there? I mean, we've probably both encountered it in other places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So first thing that comes to mind, of course, is literature class. I teach high school, and, I have other teachers who teach other grades, and then homeschooling. So, lit class around the kitchen table or wherever your schoolroom is. So literature class. Also, there's something a friend of mine introduced me to that I have loved. I attended hers, then I started doing my own, and we call them book in a day events. One of the things that's hard about a book club, I don't know about anyone else. Maybe you're the rule follower who always gets the reading done, but I struggle. I struggle to get the reading done. And then I'm like, the walk of shame. I'm sorry, I didn't do the reading. Am I allowed to come? But I really want community. So there's this, And so book in a day events, you don't do any reading beforehand. You show up, everyone has the books, and you read out loud. So you select either, a book. It could be an essay, a shorter work. It could be a work, and anything that you can read in about 2 hours or less aloud. And I guess you could do a little bit longer, but a little more further than 2 hours, it starts to just drag on, especially if you're reading aloud in one sitting. You read aloud, you take some breaks in between reading aloud, and then you cook good food together and hang out and just fellowship. And so we usually grill something good and just talk with each other and whatever else you want to do. And it's really great. And because there's cooking and grilling involved, oftentimes it will it will be the only kinds of events that husbands will end up coming to. So we see a lot of husbands being willing to come to book in a day events because they can grill, and nobody has to read out loud. You don't have to come to the table with some brilliant thing to say. You can just come as you are. And even better if there's a fire pit involved.
Right.
And that's and you just let people be who they are and make it okay.
I love that. I've never even heard of a book in a day event. And I think it sounds fabulous. I hope you have a blog post somewhere that kind of outlines that whole thing.
Yeah, I don't, but that's a great idea. I should.
Yeah, we would definitely like to link to that.
Sure. So, of course, then the traditional book club is another way that we've done. I've done that. Decide on a book to read, and we, read through it and then get together and talk. Whenever I've done book clubs, we always try to include food because that just seems to make, and then just take away the shame of, if you haven't read, it's okay, still come. The only place that I require reading to be done is a literature class because I'm responsible for holding you accountable. But if I'm not in that role, then you are an autonomous being. Do what feels good and what you can do. So we're all adults here. We're not into shaming. We're going to just not do that. And then the last thing, and this is actually something I'm doing right now, Padea Fellowship, my company has a free Facebook group, and pretty much it's an essay read aloud group. So every other week we choose an essay to read aloud. Usually we try to pick one that can be read in 30 minutes or less, and then we discuss it. And then we have our drink of choice and we read and we discuss, and it's a lovely, lovely time. So far we've read a collection of Wendell Berry's essays. We've read Simone Weil on the right use of school subjects with a view to the love of God, the longest essay title I've ever experienced. Right? We've also read some C.S. Lewis, Learning in Wartime, and right now we're reading through a modern essayist, her name's Zadie Smith, and so we're having a lot of fun with that because usually we read old stuff, right, in classical education, and so we're expanding our minds, and that's been challenging and amazing to just read a variety of essays. And the essay is just a different kind of work. And so it's fun to experience something new.
Yeah, I've wanted to come. I've partially signed up, at least checked interested on several weeks of it. And then it conflicts with the class I teach at church. And so it's like, oh no, because we used to just do the class not over the summer, but things got pushed with everything else getting pushed with the virus and all. So it's just popped up every single time so far. But I'm going to be there one of these days.
I look forward to it. We'd love to have you.
So much fun. I've read the essays anyway, which has been great.
Oh, wonderful.
I love your choices. So for those of us who haven't had experience reading with others, or if you have and you would like to consider leading a group or whatever, what are some of the things you would suggest?
So I think the biggest thing is to pay attention to what in your mind are your ideals and then what's reality. So if you're like me, you're a visionary, you have this ideal in your head and you think it has to look a certain way. And we hold on so tightly to our ideals. It reminds me, I think it's a Bonhoeffer quote where he talks about, if you love your ideal of community, you'll destroy community. But if you love the people in front of you, you'll create community. And so not everyone has to worry about this difficulty, but if you're the kind of person that does, and the idealism and visionary stuff is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And we need that in the world, but that's one of the limits of that. One of the temptations is to focus on that instead of what's going on. So what does that mean? Well, if you only have 2 people who are interested, well, that's okay. It doesn't have to have 15 people, and you can still choose to have joy in the people that are interested in joining you. Also, if everyone has a lot of little kids, and so you had this vision of this deep, intense study, I don't know very many moms who are homeschooling especially and have a lot of little kids who have found, there's a few I know, but not very many who have found the brain space to do deep, deep stuff in addition to homeschooling. One option might be reading a book together that you're doing in your homeschools. So you're doing some prep together, and you're you're also getting together. Also the book in a day, especially if husbands are involved, that's a great option. You can have some of the teenagers babysit, just make it a communal thing. And if you're a group that kind of grows up together, it becomes part of your culture and just like, hey, this is, and then your teenagers see adults reading and discussing, and it's really powerful. So those are some options. And I think another thing is if you don't have people locally, I have a couple friends who there's a couple books I'm reading. I love to, discuss ideas. We just text each other. I just read this chapter. What did you think about this? This idea, this quote. We also use Voxer, and I can just record myself. It's an app that allows you, it's kind of like a walkie-talkie app. You can record yourself, and then whenever the other person has time, listen to it and respond. So you don't have to figure out the same time you're available to get, we all are free at different times. So that works really well too. It's just like figuring it out, like how can I get this in? So those are some of the logistical suggestions I have.
I was thinking about, like, I know you mentioned the space has an impact. And I do believe that because, at other times in classrooms and things, there have been atmospheres that were conducive to sharing and atmospheres that shut people down. And same way in a former church of mine, it wasn't safe to share. And I think that's
right.
It has to be safe, even, whether you're dealing with kids or adults, whether it's a class or just a friend group. And so I think it's important to address that whole issue of atmosphere, environment, and what you're creating there to make the sharing good.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you. One of the things I talk about when I train my teachers, and this applies to if you're going to lead a group with adults or in the classroom, is creating a hospitable space that leads to healing. And that applies to adults, to students. They may look a little bit different. With adults, they're not accountable to you like a student is, but it includes two major aspects: an open and free space and boundaries. So if you think about it like a home or even a playground, you have an open and free space to play. This playground, you can do whatever you want on it, but then there's maybe a fence around it. So then you don't go off into maybe there's woods where maybe there's ticks or something like that. And so you're protected from dangers. And there's also boundaries like, hey, we're not going to hit people. We're not going to, so then people feel safe to freely play. And if, somebody does, usually there's a parent by that can mitigate and make that thing, or, help with that conversation. So in reading groups, exploring ideas, we need the same kind of environment, an open and free space where we can wrestle. Especially when we're reading literature or we're reading in contemplative ways. I'm very involved in the Charlotte Mason classical education style of teaching. And so one of the things we place a high value on is really wrestling through these books in a slow and contemplative way, a way that allows us to be changed by these books if we can, not just learn what the author is saying, but be changed by them. And so one of the things that has helped is by thinking about that like a friendship. If you're going to build a friendship with somebody, and I'm sure we've all had a friend like this in the past, where they just tell you everything to do. They're very bossy, and you just don't really enjoy hanging out with them, right? There's not this open and free space to have your own thoughts, to be where you are at. And as teachers, how often do we do this? And moms, I know I did this for a long time. I was so afraid my kids would, quote unquote, believe the wrong thing that I imposed my will on every thought they had and every experience they had, as though I needed to be the Holy Spirit for them. Like my God didn't love them more than I did. I don't know, and so it's creating that atmosphere where, and then on a practical level, they're not going to get laughed at. They're not going to get interrupted. They can ask any question without being shamed. One of the base things that makes a classical education classical is general curiosity. And that includes all questions are on the table. We can entertain questions without accepting, the ideas as dogma. We can entertain questions without accepting that as, oh, this is what I believe forever. And so that free space to do that.
You're right. That is one essential thing that I think has been the enlivening force behind any successful reading in community that I've ever had the chance to do. It's the freedom to speak, and also those boundaries that they protect the freedom, really, is basically what they're doing. You mentioned something that I wanted to pop back to really quickly. You mentioned healing a couple of times, and talk to us a minute about the part that reading can play in healing and that healing space. And I know that that's something has been very real to me through fiction, nonfiction, but especially through literature. So talk to us a minute about healing and books.
Yeah. So I guess I will have to reveal a little bit of this, it's kind of how, for me, and I'll share this, it's a little personal, but I'll share it. And for me, I view sanctification very similar to the idea of healing. So as I grow closer to Christ, as I progress in my spiritual life, I see it as the Lord healing me from my false assumptions, the lies I believe, whatever I'm struggling with, it's some sort of disconnection from what is real. And so this healing, this awakening to what is real, what is more aligned with Christ, what is more aligned with reality. And so healing and books relate to each other in two ways in my mind. First of all, the way that I teach how to read and the way I practice reading myself cultivates a mindset and a way of being that is the same pattern and way of being required for repentance and growth in Christ. It's a learning how to come outside myself, hear what the author is saying, and responding to it appropriately. And because it's a work of literature, it's a little more removed from my life, so it's not as hard to deal with. And the more I practice that, the easier it is to then respond to the Holy Spirit when I'm faced with something I need to come outside of myself, hear what the Lord is saying, and respond to it appropriately. And so it's a habit of mine that's practiced and helps me. The other thing is when we're reading books that are replete with truth, goodness, and beauty, and raise the questions, and at Padea, we call it the common human experiences or the common human questions. It doesn't matter if it's Homer or Virgil or Siddhartha or like whatever book it is, the books that are classics, one of the marks of them is they raise the common human questions and ideas, and they cause me to face these things and wrestle through them. And by wrestling through them, new stuff is brought up for me to deal with, for me to learn new perspectives on life, on God, on reality. And I then am faced, if I'm going to be a responsible reader, to wrestle with them, to think about them, to ask, okay, this is a new idea. What do I think about that? And with integrity and humility, give it a fair hearing. And that's been incredibly transformative. And so both of those things inform that healing process that I've experienced in my life. I've seen my students experience it, and it's a beautiful thing. So, yeah.
I love that. And I found so much of that true in my life too. Just the whole Charlotte Mason method of teaching also cultivates that curiosity, but also the attitude of humility when you approach those great works. And you can learn. Your affections can become more ordered through that reading, and it does draw you closer. So
yes.
that is such an amazing experience. That's why books are so much more than just entertainment, reading for fun, all of those things. They're fun and they can entertain, but so much more often they can teach, they can nourish and be part of our lives. I love to read. I guess you can tell that.
Yes.
Yeah, and I know you do too. So talking again about the the whole environment thing, you mentioned a Wendell Berry quote about inviting versus imposing. And you've mentioned that whole concept. And I want to make sure that our listeners capture that idea.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. So in Wendell Berry's collection of essays, Standing by Words, in the essay called also Standing by Words, he he's exploring two different poems and this idea, and he's looking at what is, I guess, the best poet. And he compares two poems, and he's saying poets or artists that impose their emotional state on people versus poets or artists that invite the reader to a grander narrative. And so he has a lot of different ideas about that. And I won't go into the whole discourse, but definitely check out the essay if you want. But then there's this one line, and he says, one imposes and one invites. And then he begins to talk about the effect that has on the person listening. That got me thinking about rhetoric. I teach, one of my favorite classes to teach is rhetoric. And the first part of that persuasive discourse is that invitation. Some people like to call it a hook, and that sort of thing. And we have a big discussion in my rhetoric class that says, we're going to not do that. We're going to not hook people. We have a responsibility, just like, money is amoral. You can use it for good and evil. Well, rhetoric is amoral. You can use it for good or evil. And I have the power to choose to hook someone and impose my will on them and manipulate them into following me and believing what I'm going to believe. Or I have the power to see the person as the divine image, honor their agency, and invite them. When we don't honor someone's agency, I see it as an extreme harm. Christ himself, God himself, gave us free will, and we're individual beings. Learning, there's a difference when you're a toddler and they're about to run out into traffic. Yes, I'm going to impose my will on my toddler and get them out of the street. But when it comes to learning, wrestling with ideas, coming to terms with an idea and believing something, it must be of the child's own free will that they encounter it. And as teachers, therefore, one of the biggest skills we need to cultivate is the art of inviting. And so when we invite readers, what one simple way that can happen is, if I'm going to say, read the Iliad with a class, maybe we can talk about the ideas of glory and honor. You say, what comes to mind when you think of glory and honor? And we just, have an hour-long discussion about what comes to mind. And then I transition and say, this book that we're about to read has a lot to say about that. I wonder what Homer is going to teach us and reveal about these ideas. So now they're personally invested. They know that they can come to the table with this conversation, and they're invited in. And so I'm honoring their autonomy and agency. And this is hard because sometimes students will refuse to engage. And what do? Well, yeah, I can make them do their worksheet, but they're not learning. And, that's probably another podcast episode about how to deal with that. But if we want real learning to happen, it must come by means of an invitation that a student accepts. They're little adults, they're children, but they're little humans, fully humans, that and to honor their agency is highly important.
I do think that's a critical thing. And knowing that when you are immersed and steeped in the content that you're inviting them to consider, it helps to have that to give them an introduction. Just talking about the character qualities that you mentioned, or not character qualities exactly, virtues, that is a really good entree. And I had not thought of that specifically. And I can even see where that would get the more reluctant talkers to talk. That has been, for the younger teenage group especially, has been a challenge at times. They thaw out eventually, but it can be a challenge. But what else do you have about the content that you choose for the kind of book group that you would consider, or even the one day thing, the book a day?
Yeah, so I think mentioned a couple things that this whole idea of truth, goodness, and beauty. And if you want to explore that concept more in depth, there's a book called Awakening Wonder that Classical Academic Press sells. And it's a discussion of these ideas of truth, goodness, and beauty. And it's a wonderful book. It's slightly on the scholarly side, but it's not out of reach. And so if you're a reader, I'm sure you can, that would actually be a good group discussion book, to be honest. Also, Charlotte Mason talks about living books. And then David Hicks, to give a third comparison, in chapter 1 of Norms and Nobility, he talks about the content that we choose should show reason at work and be filled with those big, baggy, baffling questions. And so here's an example. I think it's easy to see it in, say, for example, a history book. So you could read an excerpt about Alexander the Great from pretty much any history book on ancient times. Or you could, and it might give you facts like this is when he lived, these are the wars he fought in, this is what he's known for. So we get some good information about this guy. Sorry, I hang out with teenagers a lot. This guy, I'm gonna just go with it. This dude. Or you could hear a story about how he lived, something like Plutarch's Lives, and you see him almost making decisions. This is one of the things that makes a book like Augustine's Confessions so powerful. We get inside information on his processing and how he came to make a decision. We get insight into the inner logic of what got him from point A to point B. That is like gold. Anytime you see that in a book, grab that book up. That is literary and, nonfiction gold right there. And so I think seeing those kind of things, but then things that just cause you to be ushered into a world that is just beautiful and good. Like, when we're talking about fiction, it's very different than Augustine's Confessions or another nonfiction book. But something like The Lord of the Rings, it just makes you want to live in that world. And there's something about it, and the fiction we're talking about, a lot of them are classics, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're classics for a reason. There's actually an article I found, and I'll give you a link to it, but it talks about what makes a classic, and it's probably my favorite article that I found. She gives some really good pointers for, these are the facets of what makes a classic, and you start to understand, I get it. Okay, so I'll share that with you as a service to others, but help.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that'll help a lot. And I got a couple quotes here that I'm going to bug you about so we can put them in the show notes at the very end.
Uh-huh.
So we've talked about a whole lot of things. And one of the things you mentioned that puts people off is having an ivory tower vibe and making things super academic sounding. But some of the works you're talking about reading, Homer or other works like that, are big, scary works for a lot of people. How, for adults who find those things scary, people that are not in your class that you can't, but that are wanting to approach these things, how do you get them started in the same way you would a class full of teenagers?
In a lot of ways, yeah. I think the first thing is so one of the things that I think is really important to remember is that learning and teaching is 80% mindset and only 20% plans. And so there's several different mindset things that we can keep in mind as we're approaching. So this ivory tower vibe is like, I am so important because I read these fancy things and nobody can approach me and I'm going to look down my nose at you and all this stuff. I remember one time, it was the first year that our homeschool co-op had grown so much that we had to find a church. And this one mom, she was so scared because her daughter had accidentally brought in a My Little Pony coloring book to our co-op, and she had this idea that we were all these classical people and that we would shame her somehow. And of course, we all just laughed hysterically and we're like, do you know what color? And so I think we have this idea that everyone is more classical, the bow ties and Brie and Bach, and that's all, because let's be honest, that is how it's portrayed, right? In a lot of places. And I think you have to find your people. Like, for example, just throwing off the mindset. Classical education, real classical education, is about becoming a free person. The 7 liberal arts are the arts of truth perception. And it's a way, it's a mode of inquiry. Each of those 7 liberal arts is a different mode of inquiry. It's a way of approaching life. It's a way of exploring. You could practice that mode of inquiry with a children's work of literature, like Winnie the Pooh or Wind in the Willows, or you could practice it with Siddhartha, or you could practice it with Sundiata, an African epic, or, something from the East. We also have this idea that everything has to be a Western classic. There are some people who would disagree with me on that, but I reject that notion. Whatever work of literature that you want, whatever part of the country maybe you're from, or if you want to give a richer experience with your heritage to your children, do it. And there's so much more freedom and space than we like to think. And so it doesn't have to be the Iliad. You're not under obligation to read the Iliad. Now, do I think everyone should? I think it's a wonderful book. I have loved reading it, but there's not this imposition that you have to read it. So take a breath, go follow your interests. What are you interested in reading? Having that mindset. And honestly, just stay away from the groups that would like to shame you for not reading the right books. Just stay away from them, because there's plenty of free spaces of people who just love ideas and want to move towards this freedom in our humanity and in Christ, and just stick with those people. That would be my recommendation. Also, another podcast who really is great about, in fact, it's part of their tagline, rescuing things from the ivory tower, the Literary Life podcast. Their way of approaching books is, I love listening to them. I've learned a lot from both of them about reading. So
I know podcasts have been such a blessing, because I think a lot of people have discovered reading that had no idea what it was other than seeing what happened next. I mean, literally, cannot tell you how many people I've heard say that they graduated from high school not having a clue how to read. I wouldn't say that even I knew how to read, although I read incessantly. It's one of those things, you have to be in a thinking space as you're reading. And I think that's probably my personal reading tip. Just be in a thinking space. If you are reading a book heavy with ideas, and do you read more than one thing at a time? I mean, I always do.
I am always reading more than one book at a time. I usually have, because I'm reading for different reasons. And I apologize if you're hearing the ding. I don't know how to turn off the ding on my computer. Like your message, my messages are.
I know, I've been clutching my phone because it keeps vibrating.
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
That's me. It's not Janice. She's perfectly professional. I'm the one that's dinging.
Yeah, it's so hard.
Yeah. So I'm always reading more than one book. Like right now, I'm reading a really hard. So I'm doing the 20 and 20 challenge with Literary Life, and so one of the selections was a book that's intimidating that you've wanted to read but you keep avoiding. So the one I chose was A History of Political Philosophy, because it's a topic I hadn't explored a ton. I really wanted to learn about it. So that also came by recommendation of Josh Gibbs, who's another great person to follow about teaching. So I'm reading that, and I'm reading one just for fun that a friend recommended that I had never heard before. It's called Love in the Time of Cholera. And we just are reading it and hanging out and talking about it. And then I just finished Henry Nguyen's book, Reaching Out, which, oh my gosh, if you're a teacher, this is my new manual for living and reading and life. Oh my goodness. So good.
I love his work. I was looking, I was looking through my shelves for one of his books that has been particularly meaningful to me. And I'm thinking I seriously need some way to Google my bookshelves.
Yes. I were like, we should like just do a week-long project this summer, just putting all our books in Goodreads so we can search them. Because then you can scan it with the app. If it has a barcode on the back, you can just scan it. Anyway, that's off topic. But yes, I understand.
That would be so perfect. Yeah, I love Henry Nouwen though.
Yeah. So, and then I have a stack of books about friendship because I'm writing about friendship right now, and just whatever I need them for. And I don't put pressure on myself to have to finish it in any particular amount of time. I just go at my own pace.
That's what I've done as well. And I used to feel guilty about having so many things going at a time until I read the Charlotte Mason's admonition to have, multiple things, an easy book, a stiff book, as she put it, and, a couple other things. And so that's been good. You mentioned friendship as a form for reading well.
Yeah.
And talk about that just a little bit.
So this is kind of my pet project. It came about because I do a lot of training for homeschool moms. And, as homeschool moms, we tend to feel really inadequate, especially for classically teaching, because we feel inadequate to teach this way because we didn't receive one. And so I know that homeschool moms are completely capable of teaching in this way, and they're incredible. But how was I going to help them see that and then give them a form they could tap into that guides their teaching practice? And so I realized, so looking at friendship, I believe friendship is a form that parallels the journey of learning anything. In fact, if you follow this, I call them 3 movements of friendship. By following 3 movements of friendship or comparing learning to friendship, you can learn to teach anything under the sun. And so the first is play date. Like, what do you do when you meet somebody for the first time? Where are you from? What are your favorite colors? Depending on your age, the questions will vary. If you're a homeschool mom, what curriculum do you use? And then we're off to the races.
Yeah.
It's just, the introductory information, and then you just enjoy your time together. No pressure. And you walk away from that and you just kind of have a sense of how that felt, just a general sense of that person from that first encounter. But then you're like, maybe I like them. Maybe I want to get to know them more. So now you start applying intentionality and time and vulnerability and all these things that are required if you're going to cultivate a friendship. And you apply them intentionally so that you can get to know this person. You make sure to put them on your calendar because you're like, I want to become friends with this person. And over time, as that happens, you can become really good friends. Maybe you even become best friends. Maybe they become like another sister to you, but only as a result of the fruit of the work that is done. And so learning something new is the same way. There's always the awkward introductions, and this goes back to your question about, how to think about reading the classics if you've never read them. Well, everyone feels awkward when they meet someone for the first time, and some more than others. You're like, okay, I don't know what to say. Are you going to like me? Well, when you meet Homer, you're like, I don't understand what you're saying. That's a lot of weird words. And why do you take so much time preparing your food? Like, I don't get it. That's normal. That's exactly how it's supposed to be. It's the play date. It's the introduction. Nice. It's the first meeting. So learn a little bit about him. Where was he from? How did he view life? Like, what are the things I need to know about Greek history and that culture so that I can hear what he's having to say from his perspective, and then go to work, read through that book, be attentive, learn to hear what Homer is saying, come outside yourself and listen. What would a friendship be like if you just listened to yourself the entire time? If instead of being quiet and listening to this person in front of me, I'm just repeating my own self back to me. I'm building a relationship with myself, not my friend, not the book. And so it's the same skill set, the same mindset that is required in building a friendship as it is to learn. So then as a reader, we can compare that process to the reading process and be like, okay, where am I at? I'm totally confused and this is awkward. Oh, I must be in the play date, the introductory. So what kinds of things should I do now? Well, I should probably, if I'm confused, learn some about the author, maybe reach out to somebody who knows this book well, see if there's some tips. If I don't feel that anymore and I'm like, okay, I'm moving through this book, well, then it's just about endurance and continuing to do the same things as you move through the book, looking for those symbols, those motifs, those types of things. And then to the extent that we open ourselves up to that experience will be the extent to which, revelation and transformation is possible. Not every book is going to transform our lives dramatically, but we will never experience the possibility of it if we don't open ourselves up to it and do the due diligence in light of that. And so as teachers, then it's our goal not to do that process for the student, but coach them in that process, come alongside them. And, just like, how would you coach your kid if they were, making a new friend? Well, just, go, the same kind of thing, same kind of questions, same kind of demeanor.
Right. I love that. I think the best analogy I've heard in a long time for the whole process of getting acquainted with a book and falling in love with it, in a sense, we as teachers are going to be inviting our students further up and further in, as it says in Narnia. And it's just, It's a beautiful journey. And I love that. And the whole process of starting to teach in community, I think the counsel that you've offered has been most helpful as well. So as we're coming to the end here, if you could choose any 3 books to give to a new homeschool mom, what would they be and why?
Okay, sounds good. And I do want to mention, if people are interested in learning more about this way of teaching, we do have a membership site at Paideia Fellowship where they can learn these kinds of things.
Okay, can you spell Paideia for them?
It's Paideia, fellowship.com. So check us out. So 3 books. I would choose first, Reaching Out, The 3 Movements of the Spiritual Life by Henry Nouwen. I think that book parallels this idea of friendship. It talks about this hospitality that leads to healing. What I love about it is that it gets at the mindset, heart set things that are needed, that we need to face as teachers, as humans, to teach really well. And because I believe teaching is 80% mindset, I think that's the first work we have to do. Second, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. I think that it is a good fiction book that expresses that journey. He goes through so many different things and you see him change and respond. And there's this one particular scene where he's at the river. It's his death and resurrection moment in the story. And he's at this river and he wakes up and he has this huge, amazing revelation about the past and the future and where he is and how all of that interacts. And I think it's a beautiful embodiment of how we can view our students, that, to release some of the anxiety about what we hope they will become and what they are now. It's really, really helpful picture to hold on to when we're scared about, what they're stealing cookies, but you're supposed to be a virtuous man. Like, what's going on? What do I do? So that kind of thing. And then lastly, The Liberal Arts Tradition by Clark and Yon, and it's published by Classical Academic Press. And it gives a really good overview of the 7 liberal arts, and it gives a really good introduction to how to think about them. It doesn't get so much into the nitty gritty of how to teach them, but again, it's how to think about them. Because if you are thinking about these things correctly, in like 5 minutes, somebody can give you the plans and you'll know what to do. But if you have all the plans in the world and you don't have the right mindset, you'll continue to struggle with implementing it.
I think that's a wonderful insight, and that's a great selection of recommendations. It's funny that the Reaching Out was the Henry Nouwen book that I was looking for in my shelves, but he's one that I keep loaning out, and I have a feeling that he's on somebody else's shelf at the moment, and I hope I get him back. I have not read Siddhartha yet, but I will add that to my list.
It's a very short book.
Okay, that's great, because my to be read pile is incredible. It's teetering, let's just say. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our listeners before we wrap this up?
Just thank you so much for having me here. And I just want to encourage everyone, like we've already talked about, that there should be no shame in this. If you're in a community or a group that is, has this shame culture of you have to do these, I would just encourage, find a different community, because that is not everywhere. And there is no way to learn and grow as a person if we're under this oppressive shame. Like, we can't do it. It's impossible. And if the Christian life is about healing, about becoming fully alive, well, it's kind of in opposition to that calling. So yeah, just want to thank you so much for having me.
I am so delighted that you came. I've loved talking with you. And as always, I learn new things, or I learn new ways of expressing ideas that I believe with all my heart. And so for our listeners, I hope you've enjoyed learning more about reading in community with Jennifer. I'm excited to start on my new book club journey, and I hope you're feeling encouraged and equipped to begin it too. So I wish you joy in the journey. You can connect with Jennifer at PaideaFellowship.com, and of course on Facebook and various things, and you'll find that information in the show notes. And you can connect with me, Janice Campbell, at everydayeducation.com. And of course on social media as well. We both offer homeschool help at our websites, and we hope you'll stop by for a visit. And we thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us this week on the Homeschool Solutions Show. You can find show notes and links to all the resources mentioned at homeschooling.mom. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast. And while you're there, leave us a review. Tell us what you love about the show. This will help other homeschooling parents like you get connected to our community. And finally, tag us on Instagram at homeschooling.mom. That's homeschooling, DOTMOM, to let us know what you thought of today's episode. You can connect with me, Janice Campbell, at everydayeducation.com, where you'll find my excellence in literature curriculum, transcripts made easy, and more, as well as at my blog, doingwhatmatters.com, and my literature resource site, excellenceinliterature.com. I wish you peace and joy in your homeschooling journey.